My name is Garland McCoy, and together with my colleague Peter Harter, we will be presenting on agriculture and food security, with a sub-theme being building a smarter ag supply chain management system for agility, resilience, and food security by connecting the ag data generated at the edge or the source, i.e. precision ag, with the downstream ag data collected as the commodity works its way to market. All of this enabled by ubiquitous broadband network access in rural ag America. That's the goal. So my name is Garland McCoy, and I have been in the communications network infrastructure and digital packet delivery world for many decades, from the breakup of AT&T in the early 1980s to the commercialization of the internet in the 1990s by way of the U.S. Department of Commerce selling off .com domain names management to Network Solutions in Virginia, and then on to VeriSign in Silicon Valley. From undersea cable delivery to the west coast of Africa, developing countries, to policy work. I've worked on a range of network related issues in agriculture and resilience, electricity networks, natural gas networks, water, and of course, general data policy, which I teach a course on up at Syracuse University. I met my colleague and friend, Peter Harter, while I worked for a startup think tank called the Progressive Freedom Foundation during the foundation's Aspen Summit in 1995. Peter had just taken a position at Netscape. We've kept in touch over the years and reconnected when the 2018 Farm Bill, which contained the precision ag legislation, passed. So it's about 2 years we've been working together. So Peter, if you introduce yourself.
Sure thing, Garland. Thank you for kicking this off, and welcome everyone to the conference. I'm very excited to be participating with you virtually, and Garland will stick on after this recorded introduction to answer your questions live. I'm sorry I can't be there with you live as well. As Garland mentioned, I'm a farmer. My wife is a grape grower and winemaker here in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. We live about a half hour west of Salem, an hour and a quarter south and west of Portland, an hour inland from the ocean. And as the farmer of the group here, I do struggle with broadband access. I live very close to population areas, but yet my only choice is through a fixed wireless provider. I guess I could do satellite, and when necessary, I do tether on my Verizon phone or my wife's AT&T phone. But the phone companies and cable companies, they're not going to build infrastructure out to my farm. Through my local county, Polk County, they ran a voluntary citizen survey of broadband access and services, and they did a very nice job with a map on a square mile by square mile basis of the county to show who has access to what do they pay, what do they use it for, and what would they want if broadband was improved. And this actually enables people to not risk overbuilding. And it actually, especially given the fact I had a 32% response rate, proves that by ground truthing, you can not only help the providers not overbuild, but also tease out through the areas that are never going to be populated anyway, like farmland or forest land, the data from sensors as an opportunity to serve with broadband access. And that gets into our main reason why we're working on this project out of the 2018 Farm Bill provision for precision ag connectivity and smarter broadband maps. Is that local bottom-up data is really key to understanding precision ag, but also Garland's other point on ag data and the downstream supply chain. So Garland, do you want to tell our audience a bit more about precision ag and ag data?
Yeah, we would. We'd like to begin briefly by talking about the two basic nomenclature here: precision ag and its components, and then ag data, which is the larger data packet field, if you will. So with precision ag, we're talking about network devices deployed beyond the farmhouse porch, if you will, in traditional farming, livestock, orchards, vineyards, agriculture, shrimp and fish, etc., in order to generate a data flow and information feed to drive smarter ag business decisions and marketing. And these devices can reside below the ground, on terrestrial equipment, traversing the field, on drones, above the ground, in ponds, lakes, and also on livestock with data feeds that can be processed at the edge with edgeware, or downstream the cloud. The larger picture, however, is and the potential here for a lot of externalities is in ag data, which is basically defined as both capturing the edge or source data coming from these networked devices that I just talked about, but also driving that all the way down the commodities supply chain, and getting more robust data for the management of all that. So you've got again, you'd look at ag data as comprising the totality of the technology driven data streams from network devices at the source or edge all the way through the supply chain to the consumers, both locally, nationally, and internationally. So I'll turn it over to Peter. He'll give you a little bit more about highlights on smart ag.
Yeah, so here on our farm, we have experience using two different kinds of sensors. One is a fixed station. It's a small device from UC Davis that is a weather station, and we share data publicly through the Weather Underground website. And there are dozens and dozens of other people in our area with similar micro weather stations where you may see rain in the forecast, but when it hits your particular hillside, really helps you make good decisions on labor and equipment and timing of things, or not getting your crop wet, which would potentially ruin a crop. The other sensor device we share with a neighboring vineyard comes from Oregon State University to look at mildew, moisture pressure. Mildew moisture is very bad for grape leaves and grapes themselves. And there are other kinds of sensors. We have a drone we use for aerial observation and looking at vine health from that point of view. And our vineyard management company, they have their own smartphones and other sensors with their workforce. And there's sensors on equipment. There are other vineyards that have drones, robots working at ground level in the vineyard. And I know Verizon has done work with sensors on each vine to detect moisture and precision watering for conservation, and also drought and pest management issues. So there's a whole variety of sensors in every kind of agriculture. I'm just speaking from my own experience of viticulture. And that gets to today's situation here in Oregon. We went through, like people in California, through some wildfires, which had an impact on ag. And we all live in the pandemic where we've all experienced the toilet paper shortage, or now a shortage on flour because people at home are suddenly baking more. But also, sadly, when people get ill and they can't go to work, meat processing plants were in the headlines for being shut down. And that had caused some problems in the food supply chain. Or when restaurants are open and all the restaurant supply distribution centers have no place to put their product, how do you redirect that product to the people who don't have food? We have millions and millions of people entering poverty. People are using for the first time in their lives soup kitchens and food pantries. How do you redirect that food? The USDA has done some interesting things to indeed achieve that redirect because there's no pull from restaurants of the food supply, but now you have this new pull from food pantries and such. The supply chain is going through some interesting innovations out of necessity in the time of the pandemic, and I think there's a lot to learn from that. They can have us become more resilient for the next time, be it the second wave of the pandemic this winter and combined with the flu, or something else down the road. There's a lot we're going to learn together in resilience from the supply chain. And I think the combination of better data for better crops, if you will, and livestock here in the farm, combined with the ag data Garland was describing for the supply chain, we're going to be able to grow beyond the first adopters and the lessons learned from these early times in the past few months and the coming months. So I think Garland's going to share with you some specific examples of smarter supply chain management. Garland, do you want to take on these examples?
Sure. As Peter alluded to with the livestock processing, and the need to retool from the restaurants to the food pantries, getting a little bit more granular. The feed and grain providers recently digitized the paperwork on their bill of lading, which accompanied the huge shipments of feed and grain as they moved from trains to barges, then down to ocean-going ships. But the problem was that as the pandemic arrived and started doing great damage to the food supply chain, that these little islands where efforts have been made to digitize and provide more information and data with their commodity, that these were basically islands because of the lack of robust broadband communication in rural ag America, so that the problem that the information was not able to get where it needed to go, so that the produce, the feed and grain continued on to the feedlots where there was already a backup because of the processing slaughterhouses and processing facilities, and unfortunately led to a lot of produce, a lot of the feed and grain going being wasted, and unfortunately some livestock being slaughtered because again, where information, where robust communication and real-time interactive data stream at all points would have helped manage in real time, these types of situations, led to better outcomes and better food security, resilience, agility, etc. So what we're looking for is a smarter commodity supply chain management system. But in order to get there, here's the real rub here. In order to get here, you really do need to pay attention to the maps, which over the decades of coming out of the FCC have had tremendous problems associated with that. And so, and the FCC has acknowledged as much, so that now, because of the Data Act that passed in March of this year, they're now retooling their broadband mapping methodology to comply with the Data Act that was passed, and what that Data Act calls for, we think is a really good solution to build better maps going forward, which is a crowdsourced sort of ground level up method of capturing data that includes, for the first time, the data coming off of these sensors off into the fields, into the pasture lands, etc. And so, and what we're looking to do is provide some standards in the devices used, in the methodology of the data captured and recorded, and arming the armies of volunteers with the very best in a turnkey but standardized procedure, again with regard to machines, the method and capture and posting, etc., all the way along the line. We think there are armies of volunteers out there among the ag community that will come forward and help us gather this information and help post this information. The information being posted on open source on an open source platform, not proprietary, which has been a real problem with previous efforts by academia and governments, etc., to do broadband mapping at that level. It's been captured by proprietary. It's not been transparent. It's not been interoperable, which are both called for in the Data Act. So we're hoping to build going forward a better foundational and more grassroots ground truthing campaign to build the maps that are so critical for the use in both for public sector and private sector investment in building robust broadband connectivity in rural ag America. So we've done a paper, which paper Peter will tell you a little bit about, introduce, that sort of helps, which we'll talk about briefly, that help capture all of these pieces.
That's right, Garland. In the spirit of all this talk of accountable government and transparency and smarter, more accurate maps to inform investment decisions by both the public and private sector, we've walked our own talk. We have published our presentations we've made to the USDA, the FCC, NTIA, to Congress, and stakeholders at the state and county level. We've made them available on this website for this conference. In our speaker bios, there'll be links to our recent filings at the FCC, and those filings contain our presentations. And there's one presentation in those filings I want to call out by name for you. It's a paper called A People-Centered, Future-Focused Sensor and Broadband Mapping Campaign. And it's really important to think of this as a campaign, just as the Conservation Corps during the Depression got people literally out into the field to do field work and gave them skills. We think today, with a lot of people doing contact tracing for the pandemic, or now currently the every 10-year census, smartphones didn't exist 10 years ago, and the way we just take them for granted now, I think it's very straightforward to imagine people going out with the safety protocols with devices to gather data. In congressional hearings, members of Congress hold up their phones and say, why can't we just enable people to go out and gather data in the field to know what's happening? In fact, Senator Manchin of West Virginia has on his Senate website a crowdsourced report on people in West Virginia literally going out with their smartphones and gathering connectivity data. We think there's a lot of potential in crowdsourcing by citizens, but also getting data from sensors, both legacy infrastructure sensors on utility infrastructure, first responder infrastructure, but also as people want to opt in and volunteer their data from their farms and properties, and all the new sensors, some of which we're using here in my wife's vineyard. I think it's a very exciting opportunity to go capture, if you will, this data and push it out at a scalable manner through the open interoperable standards that Garland was discussing. So Garland, there's some key takeaways from our paper, I think. I hope people do go visit the paper, but I think, Garland, it's important you summarize a few key takeaways in the paper, if you would.
Sure, happy to, Peter. Again, first off, we're reaching out to people that we know already are educated and already have gone to their elected officials, the state and statewide, and been very vocal on this. And it's resonated because there's now a rarity here. There's bipartisan, both Democrats and Republicans, that have carried the message of their constituents that are fed up by being left behind, by being at the back end of this digital divide. So these are people that know that this is a quality of life issue for them, that this is something that they need for work at home, for education at home, that came about by virtue of the arrival of the pandemic, that is important to getting their precision ag data off to market. So there's so many remote healthcare, a big issue here. So they know how meaningful this is to them. The trick here is going to be, again, to build this on the foundations that are very much at the heart of the internet itself, which are protocols, standards, interoperability, open source, transparency, all the things that will ensure that this is built properly. And for the first time, again, incorporating the sensor data, because we think that the sensors, the demand for broadband brought on by the arrival of the sensors has the potential down the road of really building, really moving from a rural and ag environment that is dependent upon subsidies from the government, universal service fund, et cetera, to help continue to provide service and build out to a situation where you'll have actual competition there and regular private sector companies, for-profit private sector companies operating without being dependent upon outside government-related resources. So again, the key here is beginning with the standardized methodology, the standardized of the devices. They're going to help validate the data both on the wireless and spectrum data and the sensors data, as well as the fixed wire and fixed wireless data. We're going to work with the stakeholders, with the FCC, NTIA, state agencies, et cetera, in ensuring that we're looking at a multi-stakeholder, all folks at the table to help us, as we have in helping to vet out this paper. I just want to close by saying I think that if we're able to build the ground truthing from the crowdsource, from the ground up data on the basis of an open source and with devices and methodology based on agreed on universal standards that go from coast to coast and shore to shore, we'll start having the kind of maps that both the public and private sector can trust and rely on to make smart investments, ensure that we don't have overbuilds, and get things moving in the right direction out in rural ag America, and finally provide for the kind of smart supply chain management system that ensures security, food security, agility, resilience from the place of origin, the field, out to the plate. We're talking about sort of an ag net, which I'm sort of American agriculture net as sort of the vision of what we're hoping we're building towards. And thank you for myself and my colleague Peter Harter for viewing this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your conference.
Thank you.